Hello and welcome to Owning the Narrative. I am Bulow. The show will feature the top news of the week, complete with my observations, and even a little bit of sarcasm thrown in. The top news stories will be taken from my morning news briefings that I write on the Rick Bulow New Media blog every weekday morning. If you go on to like what you see, smash that thumbs up button. And now, let's go right into the news. After the Democrats had their convention last week and nominated Joe Biden as their nominee, the Republicans have their turn this week and they're going to renominate President Trump and outline their their vision and view for the upcoming election. This from FoxNews.com and Paul Steinhauser. Entitled Trump Aims for Convention Game Change, Banning Patriotic Program and Biden Counterattacks. The Republican National Convention kicking off Monday will be a 4-day celebration of President Trump and a visceral 4-day condemnation of Democrat nominee Joe Biden and his party. Coming off a week during which Democrats used their quadrennial confab to hammer the president's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, and warned that another 4 years of Trump in the White House will threaten the nation's Democrat foundations, Trump is promising to counter the message with a positive vision of American greatness. Trailing the former vice president in the national public opinion polls, and more importantly also down by single-digit margins in many of the key general election battleground states that will decide the White House contest, Trump is working to create game-changing moments that can alter his long-standing dynamic in the 2020 presidential race. Where Joe Biden sees American darkness, I see American greatness, the president said Friday at a gathering of the Council for National Policy, which is composed of leading Republican donors. 4 straight days attacking America as a racist, horrible country that must be redeemed, Trump said as he painted a portrait of the Democrat gathering as the darkest, gloomiest convention. Joe Biden grimly declared a season of American darkness, but look at what we've accomplished until the plague came in, and look, we're doing it again. The president pledged to showcase what we've accomplished touting his tenure as the most successful period of time in the history of the country. Testing out themes for the convention, Trump urged supporters to reject the anger and the hate of the Democrat Party and argue that no party can lead America that spends so much time tearing down America. Noting that the theme of the 4-day gathering is the Great American Story, Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel told Fox News' Bill Hemmer that this is going to be a very positive, uplifting convention. The Democratic Convention, which did have plenty of uplifting moments, was also a celebration of diversity and included the faces and voices of multitudes of average Americans. But there were also appearances by Hollywood stars, which didn't go unnoticed by the GOP, along with severe warnings about dark days ahead if Trump wins. The president's convention is going to be about real people. I'm a real mom. I don't play one on TV, McDaniel emphasized. The president's going to talk about real families, real people, what's affected their lives, how his policies have made lives better, and then what the future holds for America. It's going to be more aspirational, less grim. While Democrats face criticism that their convention was short on policy and specifics, Vice President Pence promised plenty. We're going to talk about what this president has done to revive the economy, rebuild the military, strengthen the constitutional liberties with conservatives to accords on every level. Pence said Friday in an interview on Fox and Friends. The vice president claimed that Democrat nominee Joe Biden and his party have been overtaken by the radical left, and while they didn't talk about it much, their agenda is higher taxes, socialized medicine, open borders, abortion on demand. Pence promised to make the Democrats' agenda clearer to the American people next week. and pointing to the 3-month-long nationwide protests over police brutality against minorities and systemic racism, as some of these protests have escalated into violent riots. Pence vowed that we're going to bring law and order to our cities. You're going to hear about that next week. A focus on law and order and a long-developing narrative that Biden is in league with radicals are certain to feature prominently over the next 4 days. Longtime Republican consultant David Carney said the mission for the president and the party at the convention is simple. Highlight the things they've done. You can't repeat them enough. Carney, a veteran of numerous GOP presidential campaigns, stressed that the other item on the to-do list is for the president to offer his agenda for a second term, to focus on the next 4 years. Another task for Trump and Pence is to turn the spotlight on Biden. Veteran Republican pollster Neil Newhouse, who was Republican nominee Mitt Romney's pollster in the 2012 presidential campaign, stressed that in order for Trump to win this race, voters have to understand the contrast between the two candidates. Just as the Trump campaign and the RNC were taking aim at the Democrats during their convention, the Biden campaign and the Democrat National Committee will return the favor this week. DNC Chairman Tom Perez charged Friday that chaos will be the order of the day at the GOP convention. Perez predicted that the Republican gathering will be marked by chaos, chaos, chaos. And he argued that Trump will do what he always does: lie, scare, distract, divide, and make next week all about himself. Perez highlighted that Democrats coming off the national convention are not taking their foot off the gas next week. While Republicans put together their chaos convention, the DNC war room will be working around the clock to speak truth to power, to expose the disastrous consequences of Trump's chaos presidency, which has only led to crisis after crisis after crisis. Perez claimed that unity is clearly not the message for him. Division is a message for them. The only way Trump succeeds is to divide and conquer. That's his only play in the playbook. The Republican convention gets underway Monday in Charlotte, North Carolina, where the convention was originally supposed to have been held in its entirety before the coronavirus pandemic swept the nation. A limited number of party delegates will briefly meet to hold a live in-person roll call to formally renominate both the president and vice president. The rest of the convention will be held virtually. Unlike the Democrat convention, which was purely a primetime affair, McDaniel told Fox News that we're going to have programming through the day, which would include trainings for supporters and volunteers across the country, as well as MAGA meetups. She also touted that unlike the Democratic event, all of the GOP convention keynote speakers will be live every night, and she revealed that primetime programming would start each night around 8:30 p.m. Eastern and last until 11 p.m. Eastern. I think we're going to have more of it live than what the DNC did, Trump said on Fox News' Hannity Thursday night. I think it's pretty boring when you do tapes. I'm going to go live and do mine live. The president is slated to deliver his formal acceptance speech for the Republican presidential nomination on Thursday at the White House. The party that controls the White House traditionally holds this convention second. McDaniel noted that in these unconventional times amid the coronavirus, it's been nice to go second and see what the Democrats are putting forward. Now, it's definitely going to be a sharp contrast. I might not watch the whole thing. However, I will be reading about it and bringing my take probably in an op-ed on Friday when it's all said and done, compare and contrast the two, probably even highlight most of them in this week in review, like I did last week. So, like I said, it's very interesting. We are a little over 70 days away from the election. Things are ramping up mighty quickly. Last night was the beginning of the Republican National Convention, and there are 6 quick takeaways from it. This coming from The Federalist by Molly Hemingway. The, the Republican National Convention had a better first night than the Democrat Convention had any night last week. Here are 6 quick takeaways. Number 1, DNC's problem was that it was not that it was virtual. Last week's Democrat National Convention was barely watchable. People assumed that was because of the Chinese coronavirus forced the convention to be held virtually, but the Republican National Convention is also being held virtually, and it was full of energy and excitement that was completely lacking at the Democrat Convention. Democrats had celebrity hosts, celebrity appearances, and all the talent of the generally liberal media to work with, yet their convention was an absolute grind to get through. Last night, Republicans moved along at a clip pace, featured generally compelling stories, and the speeches drew contrasts with political opponents. While some Republican speeches were markedly better than others, the only speech that didn't land was attorney and television personality Kimberly Guilfoyle's, which was shouted. Her speech would have benefited dramatically from a live audience. Number 2, real people stole the show. Most pundits spend time talking about speeches by former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley or current South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. Particularly in Scott's case, the professional politicians did give good speeches, but the most exciting parts of the evening were speeches from more everyday Americans. The best speech of the evening was given by Maximo Alvarez, a Florida businessman who described his family fleeing communist systems on the way to the United States. I've seen people like this before, he said, describing leftist totalitarian movements, when he said, I'm speaking with you today because my family is done leaving places. There is nowhere left to go. It was more powerful than 1,000 speeches from professional politicians. Andrew Pollock, the father of Meadow Pollock, who was murdered in the Parkland High School shooting, beautifully memorialized his daughter and talked about the government failures that helped contribute to her death. He condemned the media for focusing on gun control when it was education policy that led to his daughter and her classmates being vulnerable. The only famous person to speak was Herschel Walker, the football star. He talked about his decades-long friendship with President Trump and praised his work on behalf of Black Americans. He also told a story about Trump going with his family to Disneyland and riding the It's a Small World ride with them. It was such an unexpected anecdote. Number 3, how to do cross-partisan outreach. One of the few continuous themes of the Democrat National Convention was that Republicans supported Joe Biden for president, but the people they had speak could not have been swampier. Susan Molinari, who took her dad's seat in Congress, is better known as Google's former top lobbyist. She made millions lobbying for Russia, too. John Kasich, who lost to Trump in 2016, left Congress for a lucrative job at Lehman Brothers, lasting until it declared bankruptcy as a result of its participation in the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008. Christine Todd Whitman, the former governor of New Jersey and scion of a wealthy and well-connected family, was also featured. She began speaking about the Republican Party against the Republican Party midway through the George W. Bush administration, and is known for her support of abortion rights and environmental regulations. An average supposed Republican featured at the Democrat convention turned out to have voted Democrat in 4 of the last 5 elections. By contrast, the Republican convention featured Vernon Jones, a black Democrat Georgia state representative, talking about why he supports Trump. He said when he came off of Trump, all hell broke loose, and he faced a great deal of criticism. Walker also talked last night about how he had been raised to be a Democrat, but that he doesn't know what the Democrats stand for now. Kimberly Classic, a black woman running as Republican for Congress in Baltimore, talked about how her city has a number of black Republicans running to improve the situation for residents of the city. Senator Tim Scott talked about Biden's racist comments against black people voting Republican, all discuss how black voters are taken for granted in the Democrat Party. Unlike a Google lobbyist endorsing Biden, a black Democrat state rep endorsing Trump publicly takes courage. Sean Parnell, running for Congress in Pennsylvania, made an explicit appeal to Democrats considering voting Republican. In our 10 you are free. Number 4, tackle Democrat race baiting head on. One major theme of the Democrat convention is that America is a racial hellhole and Donald Trump is racist. It is quite typical for Democrats and other political groups to incite or exploit racial hatred, prejudice, or tension for political gain around the time of elections. While black voters are some of Democrats' most reliable supporters, fear of a larger segment of them being recruited by Trump has led to particular hysteria among Democrats during just this election season. The typical Republican response is to cower in fear or respond defensively that they are not racist. But the first night of this convention was not that at all. At this convention, Republicans were traded defense for offense, whether it was Jones or Classic, speaking about their frustrations with how Democrats handle race issues, Haley describing the racism she faced as a little brown girl growing up in South Carolina, Walker talking about how offended he gets when people claim his friend Trump is racist, or Scott describing how his family went from cutting to Congress in a lifetime. The speeches and rhetoric weren't timid or tiptoeing around issues, but tackling them head on. It was a surprising change of pace. Number 5, embrace, redefine Trump criticism. All elections are about choices, and good campaigns will make those choices clear. For Democrats, the monomaniacal focus at their convention was that bad orange man is bad. Some speeches accuse him of murder, others of destroying democracy, others of being racist. This was not an unwise choice for them, given that unseating Trump has been the one unifying goal of a Democrat Party otherwise in disarray and on the brink of civil war. In this vein, Biden was mostly a tool to enable this goal, rather than a candidate that people genuinely rallied around. However, they worked hard to say Joe would be a nice guy. But the limitations of that policy were on full display when speaker after speaker dispatched the complaints against Trump with ease. Representative Matt Gaetz said Trump raises his voice in a ruckus because he needs to in order to get patriots fighting on behalf of the country. Pollock said that Trump had no time for BS. Others said he wasn't politically correct. Others said he talked tough or told the truth. And speaker after speaker talked about Trump reaching out to them and showing kindness, a side that is not portrayed by many in the media. Nobody said the criticisms of Trump were completely without merit. How could they? But they showed not just that there were alternative ways of viewing Trump aside from the inside the Beltway groupthink, but that such alternative ways are far more compelling than the reflexive scorn he receives from the media and other activists. Number 6, focus on policy. One of the many misconceptions about Trump's victory in 2016 was that he won only because people disliked Hillary Clinton. While she was strongly disliked, so was he. The differences in policy should not be overlooked. Trump's 2016 campaign emphasized policy, and his voters had no confusion about where he stood on strong borders, trade with China, lengthy wars, nominating good judges, and other key issues that animate voters. While on the first night of the Republican National Convention focused on policy, about as much as most Republican conventions do, which is a fair amount, it really did highlight the unforced error by Democrats to leave policy out of their convention in favor of just tearing down Trump. It remains to be seen whether Republicans can keep the excitement and energy flowing for the remainder of their convention. Now, it's interesting the first night of both conventions. It's almost kind of like what Charles Dickens said in A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The worst of times was last week, best of times this week, and it'll be interesting to see how the how tonight goes, as well as tomorrow night and Thursday night when the president formally accepts the party's nomination and gives his speech. Then I might be watching, but in any event, I will be giving updates here. Night two of the Republican convention was last night, and President Trump broke with tradition, as he always does. This coming from thehill.com, and it says President Trump breaks with precedent on the second night of convention. President Trump broke with precedent on the second night of the Republican National Convention, granting a pardon and participating in a naturalization ceremony at the White House in videos that aired Tuesday during the primetime event. Speeches from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and First Lady Melania Trump also pushed the boundaries of rules surrounding the mix of politics and governance. Several portions of the convention used the White House as a backdrop for Trump to put his presidential powers on full display in an election year that has him trailing Democrat nominee Joe Biden as he fights for a second term. The events Tuesday offered up powerful images and striking visuals for Trump to leverage in his campaign against Biden, who is leading the incumbent president in national and key battleground state polls. William Howell, a political scientist and professor at the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy, said the choice of venue was part of a larger phenomenon of Trump and his administration pushing back against a host of Democrat norms and blurring the lines between governing and partisan maneuvering. All presidents in various ways challenge it. It's hard to maintain. I think that distinction has been really smudged under this administration, said Howell. The second night of the convention featured Pompeo delivering a speech supporting Trump's re-election campaign and in an address given from Jerusalem on an official State Department trip. Secretaries of State and Defense normally refrain from delivering political addresses at party conventions. Pompeo's speech has been shrouded in controversy for days, and earlier a Democratic lawmaker on the House Foreign Affairs Committee announced an investigation into the speech, raising concerns about potential Hatch Act and State Department regulation violations by the Secretary. Speaking against the backdrop of the old city, Pompeo touted the president's hawkish lines against China and North Korea and in the Middle East. Pompeo said his family is more safe and their freedoms more secure because President Trump has put his America First vision into action. It may not have made him popular in every foreign capital, but it has worked, Pompeo added. To conclude the evening's programming, Melania Trump delivered a rare public address from the White House Rose Garden, expressing sympathy to those impacted by COVID-19, touting the administration's work, and casting her husband as a champion of American families as part of an effort to help boost his re-election prospects. Trump's use of federal grounds for partisan political activity during an already unusual convention, pushed largely online due to the coronavirus pandemic, triggered criticism in the preceding days. On Thursday, Trump will become the first sitting president to deliver an acceptance speech from the White House. Walter Schaub, former director of the U.S. Government of Government Ethics, accused Trump and his staff of abusing the people's government by using the White House to host a party's nominating convention and destroying ethical norms. The speech of norms will send a message to the world that the U.S. is not serious about government ethics, to the federal workforce that their leaders are free to use the government to influence elections, and to the people that the chief public servant is not public served. Schaub tweeted Tuesday. Trump's allies are hoping that the White House venue will serve Trump well as he looks to give his campaign some much needed momentum. They also doubt that voters will devote attention to any controversy resulting from Trump's use of the White House for the convention. Voters are focused on Trump's response to the coronavirus, specifically the economy in their communities. Dan Eberhardt, a prominent GOP fundraiser, told The Hill last week, voters are not going to devote bandwidth to whether Trump's decision to use the White House for his acceptance speech is an ethics violation. Voters have more pressing issues on which to base their vote. In one recorded incident moment from the White House, Trump participated in a naturalization ceremony with federal officials and acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf. In his speech, Trump praised the new citizens for coming to the U.S. through legal channels. You follow the rules, you embrace our laws, you learned your history, and embraced our values and proved to be men and women of the highest integrity, Trump said. It's not so easy. You went through a lot. You've earned the most prized, cherished, and treasured possession anywhere. It's called American citizenship. There's no higher honor and no greater challenge. The Democrat National Committee blasted the event, releasing a statement saying that Trump doesn't care about immigrants unless he's using them as props. Trump's pardon of John Ponder, a convicted felon who led prison and launched a program aimed at helping former inmates reintegrated into society, was the centerpiece of the early minutes of the second night of the convention. Trump has touted criminal justice reform as one of his greatest bipartisan accomplishments, and as an example of how he's improved the lives of some Black Americans. Ponder and Richard Beasley, a retired FBI agent who arrested Ponder for bank robbery, spoke in pre-recorded segments at the beginning of the night about Trump's commitment to criminal justice reform and the empathy he has shown to former inmates. Trump, Ponder, and Beasley then gave messages in a pre-taped video from the White House grounds before Trump signed Ponder's pardon. I will continue to give all Americans, including former inmates, the best chance to build a new life and achieve their own American dream, Trump said. CNN commentator Van Jones, who runs the Reform Alliance and worked with the White House on its criminal justice reform efforts, said he loved seeing Ponder pardoned, but that he was torn by the spectacle of it. I love that he did it, Jones said. I don't like where he did it and the way he did it, so I feel torn. Now, this is interesting because and I have to do some digging on this, but I think this is indeed the first time that the president had done anything like that during the convention. I mean, I know last week he had done a couple of rallies, quote unquote rallies, but he's during the Democrat convention. So it's interesting to see how he's handling it. It'll be interesting to hear Vice President Pence tonight, and then President Trump tomorrow accepting the nomination. Like I keep saying, we're about 11 weeks from until the convention or until the election, so things are going to be very intriguing. Stay tuned for more. Night 3 of the Republican National Convention took place last night, and a whole lot of interesting things happened. Let's go right into the article. This from Molly Hemingway at the Federalist. The third night of the Republican National Convention focused on a theme of heroes and continued to highlight everyday Americans. It ended with Vice President Mike Pence's speech in the dramatic setting of Fort McHenry, where the Star-Spangled Banner flew and inspired the country's national anthem. Here are a few takeaways from the third night of the Republican National Convention. A return to realism in the foreign policy. At the Democrat convention, Joe Biden and his co-partisans said very little about foreign policy. They mentioned China, the country's greatest geopolitical foe, only once. Proponents and participants in various failed foreign policy interventions in recent decades did come out to endorse him, and the media presented that as a plus rather than a negative. At the Republican convention, multiple speakers articulated a Republican foreign policy based on the national interest. Keith Kellogg, the Vice President's National Security Advisor, gave a wonderful speech. Subtly mocking fired National Security Advisor John Bolton, Kellogg said, "Over the past 3.5 years, I have witnessed every major foreign policy and national security decision by the President. I've been in the room where it happened. I saw only one agenda and one guiding question when tough calls had to be made. Is this the decision right for America? Ask yourself, Has this president kept his promises to keep us out of needless conflicts and to pursue ending wars without end? Has he defended your interest in renegotiating trade deals that have previously hurt Americans and our national security? Has he fulfilled his commander-in-chief role by decisively going after our nation's enemies? You and I know the answer is yes. The choice is clear. Later, former ambassador to Germany and former acting director of national intelligence, Rick Grinnell, gave an impressive speech. Of Trump, he said, he called America's endless wars what they were, a disaster. The media was shocked because Donald Trump was running as a Republican, and yet he said out loud what we all knew, that American foreign policy was failing to make Americans safer. In 4 years, Donald Trump didn't start any new wars, he brought troops home, he rebuilt the military, and signed peace deals that made Americans safer. The Washington elites want you to think that this kind of foreign policy is immoral, and so they call it nationalist. That tells you all you need to know. The DC crowd thinks when they call Donald Trump a nationalist that they are insulting him, as if the American president isn't supposed to base foreign policy on American national interests. The interventionism of recent decades was actually an aberration from Republican foreign policy. In addition to being ineffective, expensive, deadly, and leading to tremendously bad foreign policy outcomes, it was also electorally harmful. Americans want a strong military, but one that is extremely cautious about getting involved in war, and when war is called for, Americans want a clear strategy, particular outcomes that are being sought, and an exit strategy that is far shorter than, for example, our 19 years in Afghanistan. Number two, substantive outreach to black voters. Hours after the evening's events concluded, the Associated Press posted a story about the convention that was so at odds with reality that it seemed to have been written before the convention began. The article by Russ Bynum was headlined, "At RNC, GOP echoes racial code of Nixon's 1968 campaign and claimed that Republicans were manipulating racial divisions to unite white voters. In the real world, each night of the Republican convention has had speaker after speaker make an overt appeal for black voters to join the Republican Party and support President Donald Trump. In years past, Republican conventions have featured a few black people talking about how and why they were voting Republican. At this convention, white and black speakers have focused on policy achievements that appeal to black voters, such as job gains for black men and women, increased funding for historically black colleges and universities, and criminal justice reform. Black friends of Trump have talked about their friendship with him, and black civil rights leaders have talked about the Republican Party's history of sustained policy achievements for black people. For years, the media and other Democratic activists have done what the Associated Press did last night. So to claim that the GOP is racist and made for the Republicans to cower in defeat. Concern about the inroads Trump was making with black voters that alarmed Democrat leaders, who began race baiting the election even earlier than usual, hyping racial grievance events in cities across the country. What's different about this year's Republican National Convention and the current Republican Party is that unlike all the previous years, everyone seems eager and ready to fight the slurs from the media and other Democrats. Last night, former NFL player Jack Brewer said, "I know what racism looks like, I've seen it firsthand. In America, it has no resemblance to President Trump, and I'm fed up with the way he's portrayed in the media. We refuse to acknowledge what he's actually done for the black community." He asked, "Are you going to allow the media to lie to you by falsely claiming that he said they were very fine white supremacists in Charlottesville? He didn't say that, it's a lie." Biden has made that lie a centerpiece of his campaign. Vice President Mike Pence, who gave the keynote address, was smart enough to highlight the unchecked riots and violence raging in Democrat cities across the country, made very easy by the Democrats ignoring the topics at their convention last week, and even suggesting support for the violent protests. "We will have law and order on the streets of America for every American of race and creed and color," Pence said, receiving a standing ovation. "The American people know we don't have to choose between supporting law enforcement and standing with African American neighbors to improve the quality of life in our cities and towns." These quotes show that the Associated Press was lying in their hit piece. They also show what a remarkably crappy job Republicans have done with black voter outreach prior to now. Chuck Todd of MSNBC said recently, Both campaigns tell me that there is a chance that Donald Trump could overperform with African American men. It's a concern of the Biden campaign, and it's a focus of the Trump campaign. Number 3, strong pro-life speakers. 2 nights ago, it featured a heavy hitter lineup of pro-life speakers, but last night did too. Sister Deirdre Byrne, a surgeon, Army colonel, and now sister in the Little Workers of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, spoke about the largest marginalized group in the world, the unborn. As followers of Christ, we are called to stand up for life and against the politically correct or fashionable today. We must fight against the legislative agenda that supports and even celebrates destroying life in the womb. In fact, the laws we create define how we see our humanity, and we must ask ourselves, what are we saying when we go into a womb and snuff out an insignificant, powerless, voiceless life? Which brings me to why I'm here tonight. Donald Trump is the most pro-life president that this nation has ever had, defending life at all stages. His belief in the sanctity of life transcends politics. President Trump will stand against Biden and Harris, who are the most anti-life presidential ticket ever, even supporting the horrors of late-term abortion and infanticide. Carol Myers, who works on school choice issues, spoke of her son with Down syndrome and how doctors tried to get her to kill him in the womb. She told a story of how President Trump invited her son Samuel to the White House. And retired Notre Dame football coach Lou Holtz gave an affectionate speech about Trump. He said that one of the reasons he trusts Trump is because of his commitment to the pro-life cause. Number 4, Chen Guangcheng. One of the most riveting speeches was given by pro-life hero and Chinese dissident Chen Guangcheng, who was persecuted for speaking out against China's one-child policy, a policy Biden has publicly countenanced. Reading his speech in Braille, Guangcheng described some of the horrors of the communist Chinese system. The CCP is focused on power and control and acts without regard to the law, order, human rights. Countless activists have disappeared or are under house arrest. Just consider the sad plight of the Uyghurs in concentration camps. Outside its borders, the CCP ignores international treaties and norms, whether it's violating the rights of Hong Kong, cheating on trade deals, threatening Taiwan, or exploiting the World Health Organization. The coronavirus pandemic, originating in China and covered up by the CCP, has caused mass death and social upheaval around the world. In the same way, the virus of the CCP is threatening the people of the world. The policy of appeasement by former administrations, including Obama and Biden, has allowed the CCP to infiltrate and corrode different aspects of the global community. The Chinese Communist Party goes through the dance of diplomacy, but it seeks to make the rest of the world bow to its authoritarian vision. The CCP is waiting patiently for the US and other democracies to bend to its will under fear of economic retribution. It was a far cry from the Democrat convention, which did not mention China but once. Guangcheng ended by endorsing Trump. Number 5, media spiraling. The media gushed over the Democrat National Convention, even though it was dark and depressing. By contrast, many in the media have lashed out against the Republican convention, sometimes ridiculously so. Reporters got upset that Pence accurately described the Wuhan coronavirus as coming from China. NBC News veteran Andrea Mitchell was upset that Pence fist-bumped a disabled war veteran after his speech. Social distancing, she tweeted. Rachel Maddow of MSNBC broke away from South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem's speech because Maddow felt it was very, very wrong to say that cities have been hit hard by crime and looting. She brought on Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan to dispute the claim. Earlier this week, Seattle rioters tried to seal police officers inside a building using quick-dry cement in order to kill him. Some reporters were mad that Representative Lee Zeldin of New York spoke from his own district in, New York. He spoke from West Hampton on Long Island, which reporters confused with nicer parts of the area. Early in the evening, Madison Cawthorn, the Republican candidate for North Carolina's 11th district, spoke from his wheelchair. Severely injured in a car crash when he was 20, Cawthorn is partially paralyzed. At the end of his speech, he lifted himself out of his wheelchair to deliver his final lines. Be a radical for our republic, which I stand, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all. Yamit Chalcendor, an activist journalist employed by PBS and MSNBC, was outraged, saying that Madison Cawthorn made it a point to stand, suggesting that all Americans should stand during the Pledge of Allegiance and National Anthem. It was a direct rebuke of actions by people, including black athletes who are currently sitting out games, protesting police brutality. Number 6, stagecraft and enthusiasm. Conventions in past years have become much more focused on TV presentations than substantive occasions of discussion and debate. This year made that even more pronounced as the coronavirus restrictions killed the lively debate about platforms, but the stagecraft is important, and this year it's been excellent. The setting of Pence's speech was beautiful, and the evenings have had nice themes that get revisited throughout. Cawthorn stood up at the end of his speech. Guang Cheng repeatedly talked about how difficult it is to stand up to tyranny, and when Pence concluded his speech, Trace Atkins came out to sing the Star Spangled Banner. When he did so, a group of disabled war veterans got up, some with great difficulty, and stood with respect for the country they serve and its symbols. Democrats pushed a simple theme of darkness versus light, at one point having Biden kind of walk from the dark into the light. Unfortunately, his last moments at the convention were shrouded under a dark mask on a dark stage outside. Last week, Ari Fleischer commented on how new it was to see large groups of people praising Donald Trump. He said that conventions that repeat platitudes don't move voters, but ones that give people something new to reflect on do. Because of the media being so hysterically anti-Trump and suppressing the news, this convention is the first time in about 4 years that non-leftist Americans have seen other Americans reflecting their positive views about Trump and the administration. It's emboldening for Republican and independent voters as they prepare for the fall campaign that will surely include many surprises. Yes, this convention has been full of many surprises, and probably more to come tonight when the president gives his acceptance speech, be about 10:30 or so, and from then it's straight on until November 3rd, Election Day. The Republicans' convention ended yesterday with the nomination of President Trump. We are now 66 days and 8 hours until Election Day 2020 on November 3rd. But when it's all said and done, what will matter in November? This is an article from Real Clear Politics and A.B. Stoddard. The Republican National Convention was such a dazzling display of compelling political theater. Freed hostages, a pardon ceremony, a naturalization ceremony. One could be forgiven for half expecting to see fire eaters, lion tamers, or a 3x5 foot Publishers Clearinghouse check suddenly bestowed on an exuberant supporter. It's hard not to imagine President Trump getting a polling boost from an effective convention, but it's also hard to know whether it will make a difference 2 months from now. Traditional campaign metrics didn't matter in 2016 when Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, and it's not clear whether that they will make a difference this year. 4 years ago, Clinton certainly set her up for victory with endorsements from important people, more campaign offices in battleground states, more money, and more than 50 BAFO math geeks on her bigger data team. Things didn't work out so well, though. Trump had a great convention this week. But in Trump's America, nothing that happened last week matters now. Remember last week? Trump declared a boycott of Goodyear tires, refused to distance himself from the quote-unquote conspiracy called of QAnon, deemed a domestic terrorist threat by the FBI, and accused the Food and Drug Administration of being the deep state working against his re-election. Pretty basic stuff by his standards. There will be plenty more of this in the days and weeks to come. A continual washing away of whatever came before. What came before in political campaigns lost its importance in 2016, and that threat is likely to evolve even more this cycle. During the Republican primary back then, Trump skipped all the diners and pancake breakfasts that you had to visit and had to participate in to win in Iowa and New Hampshire, thus launching your path to the nomination. While other candidates were cramped into small gatherings at churches and public libraries, Trump held made-for TV rallies and won. What Trump disdains in small gatherings, he makes up for in headliner events. He started this week in Charlotte, the original location of his convention, before it was relocated to Florida for fewer pandemic projections, then canceled and reimagined for Washington, D.C., where nominating and delegate business was still taking place. After his formal nomination Monday, he rambled on in a spontaneous acceptance speech about how the Democrats are going to steal the election. He's busting on former Vice President Joe Biden for not campaigning in person and attending any part of the DNC events in Milwaukee. Find me the voter who will remember, let alone resent, that Biden didn't make it to Milwaukee. Instead, the Democrats seemed quite at ease with the virtual vortex back in Delaware or Los Angeles, where some genius pulled the entire thing together from home without shoes on. Biden and Senator Kamala Harris spoke to the nation from dark, sparse, and silent places with black masks on most of the time. It looked dreary and somber. Trump might call it low energy. It wasn't nearly as good as a television show as the RNC, but that didn't likely matter either. By most measures, the DNC was a pretty shrewdly designed convention, too, hitting the right notes, avoiding the wrong ones. While Biden didn't get a bounce in a barely polarized country, it started to exceed an 8-point lead. He solidified his favorability with voters who didn't know much about him or think much of him before, save for his ability to beat Trump. It's also hard to know who was watching the conventions. Some political focus groups this week found participants who hadn't watched 1 minute of them. Viewership, with the exception of the night Melania Trump spoke, was smaller for the RNC than the DNC. And there's no surprise people are skipping them altogether. Excuse me, I had to take a drink of water. After all, conventions became really dull waste of time without surprises or consequences a long time ago. And on Zoom or in empty rooms, even Kimberly Guilfoyle's rapturous screaming doesn't feel quite the same as thousands of people cheering in unison, standing next to one another. Trump knows this, which is why he prefers rallies to regular campaign events, and why he dangerously stuffed 1,000 people side by side with no mandatory mask rule on the White House lawn Thursday night. You know, maybe conventions are more helpful for fundraising than actually changing or soothing voters' minds. But yet it's hard to see an advantage in one party raising more money than the other party during these 2 weeks is consequential. And how much of an advantage does money buy you these days in a pandemic when campaigning is light? After all, in 2016, Clinton had more money in the machine, but Trump had the message. That may not be the case this year, as Biden is promising to build back better and return to normal with his battle for the soul of the nation, while the combined Trump-aligned PACs and campaign and the RNC have spent nearly $1 billion to discover Trump still doesn't know what his re-election campaign message is. Before the COVID-19 outbreak, it was keep America great, but now that country has been demolished by infection, grief, and economic destruction. The message is mostly MAGA, or as Vice President Mike Pence likes to say, make America great again. But still, sometimes the transition to greatness returns, and other times Trump is asked by simply interviewers what he would do with the second term, and he grumbles and self-pity about the Russia investigation. The next moment of leverage of the general election campaign will be the much anticipated presidential debates on September 29, October 15, and October 22nd. Biden was arguably one of the worst debaters on the stage during the primaries, yet he won the nomination. In 2016, Trump's bully routine helped him win the primary debates with 8 or 10 rounds at a time, but he was out-debated by Clinton in all three general election matchups and still won the nomination, or still won the election. As he did in 2016, Trump will tell everyone he won the debates no matter how they go. Last time he tweeted out results from the social media accounts from news organizations, which weren't scientifically conducted and weren't considered accurate, but reputable polls, including those from Fox News, Gallup, CNN, NBC Political, Public Policy Polling, and YouGov, show Clinton winning all three. Trump hopes for Biden to have a senior moment or several, and Democrats fear the same. More likely, Trump will do something to startle Biden. Will he show up with Tara Reid and provoke an angry response? Biden is susceptible to this because he is a hothead like Trump, just not quite as hot. So when Biden can't remember the name of a law he wrote several times, do voters decide they must support Trump instead? It's more likely the arguments about vigor and acumen will hit too close to home for Trump, and the Democrats and the Lincoln Project will send around more videos of the president slurring his words the next day. The polling will bounce up and down. Will evictions and foreclosures and layoffs cascade through the fall? Or will the economy improve as the stock market seems to believe? Will crime spikes continue in cities? More black men get shot by police? Protests swell or turn violent? And schools shut as outbreaks multiply? Or will a vaccine materialize faster than any ever has? It's 2020, the year of the unthinkable. Much more can happen, and it will. We won't know what the difference is made until it's all over. And that from Real Clear Politics, like I said, 2020 has been rather interesting with the coronavirus and with other things. So we're like I said, we're coming down to 66 days, 7 hours, 59 minutes until November 3rd. Things are rocking and rolling at a pace, and I'll be here to bring it all live to you. And that's going to do it for the news for this week. I am Mick Bulow. Again, if you like what you watch, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. Also subscribe and tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell an enemy or two even. And I will be back next week. Until next time, peace.